Here we go. All right, so we're going to look first, just very briefly, at the beginning of this parsha, the story of Korach, just to remind you, or those who weren't here last time will be able to jump in. So page 860, we're looking at Korach, which is chapter 16 of the book of Numbers. If you don't have Eitz Chaim, you'll find it there. And as we see a rebellion against Moses and Aaron, and essentially against God, because they are God's designated representatives. I think, if I remember correctly, in the Hertz Chumash, this is called the Great Mutiny, which I think is apt. Korach is the major spokesman, but there is also with him two others, Datan and Aviram, who are from the tribe of Judah. So one is a Levite, and the others are from the tribes of Judah, and therefore they both represent people who could have been leaders among the people. Their main claim is that Moses has arrogated power, that he's taken, they say, Rav Lecha, you've taken too much, right? And then they make the claim that the whole people are holy. How dare you make yourself holier than the rest of the people? And it's not just them, but there are, along with them, 250 others, right? This is a crowd, 250 who are not only, they are chieftains chosen in the assembly, men of repute, right? So this is truly a rebellion, right? This is an attempt at a coup. And the argument that they're making, again, is that the whole people is holy, and, which is, they're taking Moses's words, as it were, and throwing them back at him. Moses had said that the people are Mamlechet Kohanim and Goy Kadosh, they're a holy people. Korach says, so what makes you holier than anyone else, right? Of course, ignoring the fact that holiness is not intrinsic to every person, but rather that that the nation as a whole has been chosen for a sacred mission, right? And that if an individual wishes to be holy, they have to maintain a very high standard. At any rate, Moses hears this, and now I'm jumping ahead to verse 5 on 861. Come morning, the Lord will make known who is his and who is holy. He will grant access to himself. He will grant access to the one he has chosen. So this idea of granting access really largely has to do with who can go into the tabernacle, who can go into the Holy of Holies. That is, who really can be as close as a human being can to God. So he then sets out a challenge. Do this, you Korach and your band, take fire pans, put fire in them tomorrow, lay incense on them before God. The man who the Lord chooses shall be the Holy One. You have taken too much on yourself, sons of Levi, right? They said Rav Lecha, he says Rav Lechem. You've taken too much. You're the one, Moses is saying, who has arrogated power. So Moses then says to Korach, here are sons of Israel, it is not enough for you, right? Is it a small thing that God has set you apart from the community of Israel and given you access to him, that you do have a sacred role to perform the duties of the Lord's tabernacle, to minister to the community and serve them? He has advanced you and your fellow Levites with you. Do you seek the priesthood too? It is against the Lord that you and your company have banded together. For who is Aaron that you should be against him, right? So this does seem to be, there are two things, there are two different challenges. One is to sort of the ritual leadership, right? Aaron, his particular access is going in, all right? And that is, if you're a Levite, right, and you're not Aaron or one of his sons, what makes him so special? But there's also a rebellion against Moses, who is the kind of political, spiritual leader of the people, and what makes him so special. So Moses now sends for Datan and Aviram, the sons of Eliab, right? He calls them, and they refuse to come. Calls them and they refuse to come. So I would ask you to be muted unless you want to ask a question. So please make sure that you're muted. Okay, so they refuse to come. And now they've really, this is the most extreme sort of kind of comment. Is it not enough that you brought us from a land flowing with milk and honey to die in the wilderness, and that you should lord it over us, right? Even if you had brought us to a land flowing with milk and honey and given us possession of fields and vineyards, should you gouge out these men's eyes, right? So the first thing that they say is that they say, you have brought us from a land flowing with milk and honey, right? Which is, of course, the classic way the Torah refers to the land of Israel. But what do they say? That Egypt was the land flowing with milk and honey, which is outrageous, of course, because Egypt was a place of slavery. Right? It was the furthest thing, right? So this is, it's hard not to see this whole thing through the lens of politics. Right? And I don't mean politics in the sense of a particular party, but this is a kind of political fight. And Korach says, in a sense, why should you be the leader? Right? They're challenging him. Moses's popularity ratings at this point are very low, right? There's very much discontent among the people. It's not surprising that Korach can get 250 people. It's been one calamity after another. It's been one rebellion after another. So as a politician, if we want to overlay that, which I'm not sure is quite fair, but it's a good analogy, right? Moses's popularity ratings are very low. Right? And here we have someone who now wants to challenge his authority. And you know what politicians do? I mean, you hear them do it, is they distort the record of it, sometimes in outrageous ways, right? They turn, right? So here he's saying, they're saying, you brought us from a land of milk and honey. This reminds me when John Kerry was running for president, he was swift boated. I don't remember this, but he had been a hero, right? A decorated war hero. But his opponents claimed that he was actually a coward. Right? They created this whole story. And I think what's going on here is somewhat similar. By recasting the past in a way which simply wasn't true. This is a little bit like what we saw earlier in the rebellion, where the people said that Egypt was a wonderful place, where we had, lots, they were complaining about the manna, which was, from their point of view, was routine. It was always the same. It tasted the same. They were bored. They were sick of it. And they said, oh, Egypt, where there were leeks and fish for free, right? And this takes it a step even further. Right, that was a land flowing with milk and honey. And then, even if you had brought us to a land flowing with milk and honey, given us possession of fields and vineyards, should you gouge out these men's eyes, right? This image, right, really
Oh,
very visceral, right? And it's an idiom. If you look at the note in Eitz Chaim, means to hoodwink, corresponds to modern idioms like throwing dust in the eyes or pulling the wool over the eyes, right? So it seems to be a biblical idiom, something like that. And they say, we won't come. And Moses says to God, pay no attention to this. I haven't taken one ass from them, nor have I wronged any of them. And Moses says to Korach, now here is the challenge. Tomorrow, you and all your company appear before the Lord, you and they and Aaron, each one take his fire pan, lay incense on it. Each of you bring his fire pan before the Lord. 250 fire pans. You and Aaron also bring your fire pans. Each one of them took his fire pan, put fire in it, laid incense on it, and took his place at the entrance to the tent of meeting, as did Moses and Aaron. And Korach gathered the whole community against them. So all of this is taking place now, just outside the Holy of Holies, the tent of meeting, and we have a showdown. This reminds me a little bit, and you might know this story about Elijah. Elijah and the priests of Baal, the pagan god, the Canaanite god, and the people seem to be following Baal's priests. And at the top of Mount Carmel, there is a kind contest between Elijah and the priests of Baal. They all call on to their God and want their God to take an offering, and there's no response. And Elijah mocks them. And then Elijah makes an offering, and in fact, he covers it with water and just makes it, you would think, impossible to burn up. And then a fire comes and it's consumed. And we see who is right and who is wrong. This is going to be a kind of contest, but the stakes are very high. Because, as I mentioned last time, this is a little reminiscent of the story of Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, who go in and offer what's called strange fire and are consumed. Right, so the stakes are high here. And now Korach's got them there, and the presence of the Lord appears there, right? God is manifest. And the Lord speaks to Moses and Aaron, stand back from this community, and I will annihilate. So we've seen this before. God is now threatening, right? The whole people have gathered because they're going to witness this throwdown, this trial, right? And God says to Moses and Aaron, okay, step aside because I'm going to get rid of all of them. We've seen this before, where God says, I'm sick of these people. I've had enough. I will destroy them. We saw this with the golden calf. And I'll make a new nation just from you. Moses and Aaron's response here is to fall on their faces, and they say, O God, source of the breath of all flesh, when one man sins, will you be wrathful to the whole community, right? So their argument, again, first of all, we see them now interceding on behalf of the community. They want to protect the community. They want the evildoers to be punished, but not everyone else. And the argument that they make here should echo back to Genesis in your minds, right? To the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And God announces what it's Parshat Vayera. Let me just go back to it. I want to just read it because I want you to really see how similar it is. Bear with me for just a second. I'm almost there.
You're gonna get, grab something to eat. Not that
Okay. Right. So if you look at it's Genesis chapter 18, and looking beginning with verse 20 in Eitz Chaim, it's on page 102.
Did you making a list?
Yes, honey.
Good.
Okay. Again, I want to ask you to mute so we don't hear you. Okay. And God says to, well, actually beginning in verse 19, the Lord says, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, their sin is so grave, I will go down and see what they did. And Abraham comes forward, and here is what he says. Will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? Right? He says, will you not forgive for the sake of the innocent? Far be it from you, Abraham says, to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent and the guilty, so that the innocent and the guilty fare alike. Far be it from you, shall not the judge of all the earth do justice? Right? So that's Abraham's argument at Sodom and Gomorrah. He says it's not right. Don't destroy the innocent together with the guilty. And here we see exactly the same argument. When one man sins, will you be wrathful to the whole community? We're back with Korach. It's verse 22, chapter 16, and it's page 863. God here is called Elohei Haruchot Lakol Basar. God who is the God of the source of the breath of all flesh. Right? It's an interesting way of addressing God. The breath, of course, is in Hebrew the ruach, right? The spirit. But here it's quite literally. Remember the story in Genesis when Adam is created, that God takes some of the dust and then breathes into it God's animating breath. So here Moses and Aaron are saying to God, you are the source of all life. How could you take some lives, the lives of the innocent? How could you withdraw your breath from them? And now we go on, and therefore, God seems to accept this argument. Right? And he says, speak to the community and say, withdraw from the abodes of Korach and Datan and Aviran. And Moses rises and goes to Datan and Aviran, and the elders following him. And he says to the community now, move away from the tents of these wicked men, touch nothing that belongs to them, lest you be wiped out for all their sins. So they withdrew, right? So the idea is now people have to decide, who are they with? Are they going to stay or are they going to withdraw? Right? Presumably those who withdraw are innocent and they are going to be protected. Datan and Aviran come out and they stand at the entrance to their tents with their wives, their children, and their little ones. And Moses says, by this shall you know that it was the Lord who sent me to do these things, for they are not of my own devising. If these men die as all men do, that their lot, the common fate of all mankind, it was not the Lord who sent me. But if the Lord brings about something unheard of, so that the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up, and all that belongs to them, and they go alive into the underworld, you shall know that these men have spurned the Lord. Right? So Moses sets up a kind of test. This is not the test of the fire pans, right? This is now the test of who is with him, who is against him. God doesn't seem to command this particular test. And here Moses is kind of calling upon God to do Moses's will here. It's quite striking. We don't, he feels confident enough to do this. And immediately, scarcely had he finished speaking all these words, the ground under them bursts asunder, the earth opens its mouth and swallows them with their households, all of Korach's people, all of their possessions, right? Now, this is not an earthquake exactly, right? Because the earth opens up and then it closes, right? And they are gone. Just a word about where they go. They go down alive to Sheol, right? Sheol is the underworld. The biblical view of where people go when they die is not to a great place. And it seems that everybody goes there. It's not a place where the righteous are rewarded and the innocents are punished. There's no heaven and hell in the Torah itself. The rabbis do see something like that. We see it in rabbinic literature. People go to paradise and they go to Gehinnom, right, which is a place of torment. But here, everybody goes to the same place. It's not a great place. It reminds me a little bit of, I'm sorry. I was going to say something, but I realized it's not quite true. Well, yeah, I guess it is true. If you know the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey, there is a point in the Odyssey where he goes to visit the underworld. And in the underworld, he sees heroes and villains, and they're all kind of the same. There isn't, right? So here too, it's not a great place. It's where everybody winds up. And here, they go down alive. And there are all kinds of midrashim about how you can still hear their voices as you walk. If you walk by the spot, you can hear them calling out because they are there alive. Now, the image here seems to be that everybody dies. But it's interesting because the sons of Korach actually have a different place in biblical literature elsewhere. And that is that if you look in the book of Psalms, some of the Psalms are attributed to the sons of Korach, right? So it's hard to know what to make of that, except perhaps to say that there was some possibility, unlike what the text seems to be suggesting here. There is some sense, perhaps, that there was redemption. There's even a statement in the Talmud that the sons of Korach eventually are found studying Torah somewhere. But here the sense seems to be that they die, and not only do they die, but there's this fire and 250 men who were offering the incense. We've just jumped back to that. They also die. So now we're starting chapter 17. Before we do, I just want to take a brief break. I'm going to change the view. And if anyone has a question up to this point, I'm happy to respond. Saul, go ahead.
So they were swallowed up before they even had a chance to offer these machtot, these censers.
Well, it seems to be, there seem to be two different accounts that are being intermingled here. Because the Datan and Aviram, right, seem to be the ones, and their followers seem to be the ones who are being swallowed up. And then we have Korach and right, Datan and Aviram are from the tribe of Levi, and there are lots of other leaders with them. And then Korach seems to be, Datan and Aviram, I'm sorry, are from the tribe of Judah, right? They seem to be who swallowed up here. And then Korach and his followers, who are Levites, seem to be the ones with the fire pans. It's very unclear. The stories seem to be commingled. It's very hard to sort of piece it apart, whether these are two different accounts of the same thing that are being blended. It's very hard to say. Modern commentaries want to see these as two completely different stories. Traditional commentators do try to harmonize them, but so as you suggest, if you're trying to harmonize it, there are obstacles to overcome. But I think we're turning back now to the fire pans. Before I do, any other questions or comments? Okay, so let me change the view again. And we're up to chapter 17. God speaks to Moses saying, order Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, to remove the fire pans, for they have become sacred. So these pans, which are being brought by the people, right, who are the rebels and who have been consumed, nonetheless are considered to have some sanctity to them. Right? There has been a kind of offering with them, and therefore, even though the purpose was impure, they can't simply be discarded. And beyond that, there seems to be a good purpose for them. So scatter the coals, remove the fire pans from those who sinned at the cost of their lives, let them made into hammered sheets as a plating for the altar. For once they had been used for an offering, they became sacred, and let them serve as a warning to the people of Israel. So what they're going to do, and if you go further, Eleazar the priest took the copper fire pans that had been used for the offering by those who died in the fire. They were hammered into plating for the altar. As the Lord ordered him through Moses, it was a reminder to the Israelites so that no outsider, no one not of Aaron's offspring should presume to offer incense before the Lord and suffer the fate of Korach and his band. So here, this is something that we've seen again and again. Amira, give me a second. Here's something we've seen again and again, and that is that they're always concerned with reminding people of things. Remember with the manna, they gathered some of it together and they set it aside as a memorial to all generations of how God had sustained the people in the wilderness. The idea that this will be an eternal reminder. Also, people will see it and they'll say, "Oh, that's what happened to Korach. Let's not forget about it." The altar was originally covered with bronze, and this now is a second layer of covering copper. And you know what happens to copper, right? It turns green, right? So this is going to be very visible to the people. Okay, I want to come back to Myra now, who I know has a question. At least raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah. Was Korach against God, or was he against Moses? And my question is, if he was against Moses, then God, I guess, was selecting Moses as his representative? See, that I don't get that completely, whether he was against God and just wanted, or he was just against Moses.
Right. It's a good question. So I think if you, I'll give you, actually, if we go back to the end of Korach, I think that's where it is. Let me find it. Yeah, maybe I am wrong. Maybe it's, yeah, it's the end of Bahalokha. If you, this was when Moses and when Miriam and Aaron were complaining about Moses's wife, right? This woman, this Cushite woman that he married, and they say, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken to us as well? And then, right, so what makes him so special? And then God says to them, hear these my words. When a prophet of the Lord arises among you, I make myself known to him in a vision, or I speak in a dream. Not so with Moses. He is trusted throughout my household. When I speak to him, I speak mouth to mouth, plainly and not in riddles. How did you then not shirk from speaking against my servant Moses, right? So yes, Moses is God's chosen representative, right? Moses speaks in the name of God. That's part of what it means to be a prophet. And he is not just a prophet, he is the prophet. At the end of the Torah, some of the last lines, Lo kam od navi b'Yisrael, there will no prophet arose among Israel. There wasn't, there won't be, except for Moses. So Moses is God's spokesman. If you challenge Moses, you are challenging God. And I think that is, even though, and I think this is what's perhaps leading your question, they seem to be attacking Moses and Aaron. It seems to be a political struggle, right? It's about him. They seem to, in fact, be loyal to God, right? They said, God said we're all holy. They're not, right? But to attack Moses, unlike attacking a modern political, in some ways, Moses's role here is like an ancient king, where they had this idea of the divine rights of kings, that the king was really appointed by God. Pharaoh was appointed by God. Pharaoh was, in fact, in some ways, a god as far as the Egyptians were concerned. Let me say something about that, just because I just came across this and I think it's hilarious. I've been studying every Thursday. I study Midrash with one of my colleagues. We've been studying the Midrash on the book of Exodus. And there's a place in the book of Exodus where Moses goes to speak to Pharaoh before the plagues, and he tells him what's going to happen, and he meets him at the Nile. So the Midrash asks, why at the Nile? What is Pharaoh doing there? And the answer, according to the Midrash, is he went there to pee, right, to urinate. Right? Why? Because he had told the people that he's a god. And seeing him do this would tend to delegitimize him. Right? It would work against his claim. So he went to do it secretly. He would go down to the Nile. None of his courtiers should see it, right? All that's an aside. I just was very amused by it. But the idea here seems to be, it's like the divine right of kings. Moses is the selected leader. You go against Moses, you're going against God. Okay, so let me just find where we are again. Right, so they make the fire pans and they put them out. The next day, right, you would think this is it, it's done. Apparently not. The next day, the whole Israelite community riles against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You have brought death upon the Lord's people." It's like you could, his popularity ratings are so low that even with this dramatic demonstration, the fire pans, the earth, they're still, the people have just had it. They've had it wandering in the wilderness. They, the whole generation has to die out because of the scouts. There's not enough to drink. The food is boring, right? And so still, right? Next day, Moses and the whole community say, "You have brought death upon the Lord's people." As the community gathered against them, Moses and Aaron turned to the tent of meeting. The cloud covered it, and the Lord had appeared. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Remove yourself from this community, that I may annihilate them in an instant. They fall on their faces." And Moses says to Aaron, "Take the fire pan, put in it fire from the altar and incense, take it quickly and make expiation for the people," right? So Moses is telling Aaron, God is going to destroy them. We have to have some kind of atonement, try to stave off the divine pleasure. For wrath has gone forth from before the Lord, the plague has begun, right? So God's response here is a plague. And it's interesting, the Hebrew, ki yatsa hakesef milifnei Adonai. Wrath has gone out from God. The sense here is that this is an agent of God. This is not just God being angry. God's wrath is almost, one could sort of compare it to the angel of death that went out in Egypt. It seems almost independent. It's been unleashed. So, and the way this malevolent force sent by God works is through plague. And then we get this sense of Aaron, who does what Moses told him, and he takes the fire pan and the incense. He goes in the middle of the people, and he begins to make expiation for them. And he is standing between the living and the dead, right? And then the plague comes to an end, right? I have to say, it's a very dramatic image. One of the roles of the priests is medical. We see this particularly in the book of Leviticus, where their job is to diagnose sara'at, this disease that comes upon people, and they are the ones who quarantine people who have it and then allow them to be readmitted. We have here a sense, this isn't quite medical, it's really an intervention to forestall God's wrath, but it does take place in the context of a plague. And I think that is interesting. 14,000 people, 14,700 people die in the plague. Aaron returned to Moses at to the entrance to the tent of meeting, right? And now we're going to get something really quite different. We're moving away from God's wrath, which didn't really seem to work. And we're going to get a very different kind of illustration of priestly authority. So what happens? God says to Moses, "Speak to the Israelite people, take from them, from the chieftains of their ancestral homes, one staff for each chieftain, 12 staffs in all, inscribe each man's name on his staff, there being one staff for each head of an ancestral house. So inscribe Aaron's name on the staff of Levi." So each tribe has a staff. We saw this actually at the very beginning of the book of Exodus, when the tribes are all arrayed and each one has a flag, right? They have staff, and They're going to take the staff, the tribal staff, and the leader of the tribe puts his name on it, right? And then they're put inside the tent of meeting, and the staff of the man I choose will sprout, and I will rid myself of the incessant mutterings of the Israelites against you. Moses tells the Israelites, their chieftain gave him a staff, 12 staffs in all, among them the staff of Aaron. Moses deposits them before God in the tent of meeting. The next day, remember we had the next day before. Before the next day was when the fire pan showdown happened. Here, the next day, Moses goes in, and there the staff of Aaron of the house of Levi had sprouted. It had brought forth sprouts, produced blossoms, and borne almonds, right? Moses brought out the staffs from before the Lord to all the Israelites. Each identified his staff, right? So something miraculous has happened. I think the best way to maybe think about this is a slow motion photograph, stop motion photograph, right? Where you take, if you want to watch something bloom, you take a picture of it, and then 2 days later, a picture, and so on. You put it all together in a movie, and you see it happen very fast. This happens overnight. Aaron's staff now blossoms into flowers, fruits. It's an almond staff, right? Very appropriate. Yesterday was, yesterday was Tu B'Shvat, when we think of the flowering of almonds in the land of Israel. At any rate, put Aaron's staff back before this place to be kept as a lesson to rebels, so that their muttering against me may cease, lest they die. And Moses did what God has commanded him, right? So we've moved from the negative to the positive, right? And it's quite striking. And it also, I think, says something perhaps about God. You know, one of the things we see in the Torah is kind of God growing. The biblical tradition is not that God is always the same, that God learns from experience. It didn't work. And Moses and Aaron are not willing to have him wipe everybody else and start again. So now, instead of the negative, we get the positive. We get this visual demonstration of the fact that Aaron and his sons are the chosen priests. I think it's, unfortunately, Israelites say to Moses, we're going to die, we are lost, all of us are lost. We perish, we are lost, all of us are lost. Anyone who so much as ventures near the Lord's tabernacle may die, we are doomed to perish. So you can almost hear them. They're saying the same thing over, we're lost, we're doomed to perish, right? And what we're going to see at the beginning of chapter 18 now is a reiteration of the role of the priests. So the people are being reassured, no, you don't have to worry. They're going to take care of that. They're going to be the ones who deal with the sacred. You will be protected. And this too, after first we get this positive view of Aaron's authority, and now we have a real concern for the people's fears. They're being given some sort of way of reconceptualizing it so that they won't worry. Okay, I want to just switch back for a moment to the gallery view. Any questions or comments on anything we looked at today? Yeah, Marilyn.
Okay. How come Moses argues with God so much?
Moses's role is really twofold. He represents God to the people and the people to God, right? What's really striking, and I think this is in some ways an indication of the greatness of Moses, they attack him again and again and again. He's becomes exasperated. He's fed up, right? This people is too much for me to bear at one point, he says, and yet he continues to fight for them. It's really, he is a servant, not only of God, but of the people. And when given the opportunity to simply have the problem go away, I'll destroy them all and stick with you and Aaron, Moses says no, right? And he's willing to, and we see that argument. It's the same argument that Abraham makes, right? Where you destroy the innocent together with the guilty. This idea that people can challenge God and demand that God behave in a just way, according to human standards, is in fact inherent in the Jewish personality, if you will, right? From Abraham to Moses. It is really remarkable. It's just, there's an expression, a rabbinic expression, chutzpah klape shamayim, right? Chutzpah in the face of heaven, right? I mean, who are we to say? But Abraham holds God accountable, and Moses does too. It would be wrong. How can you destroy? And I have to say that taking it right up to modern times, it's reasonable to say, where was God during the Holocaust? Right? It's reasonable. It's not, it's not really chutzpah. God has told us that we are to view God in a certain way. This seems to be a violation of that way. And the Jewish tradition, I think, really does legitimize. And I can't imagine any other tradition that really does legitimize our questioning God. There are limits. Clearly, there are limits. Part of the reason perhaps why Moses is able to question God, and Abraham too, is they're clearly men of faith. Right? Yet, right, even the Russia at the Seder, gets an answer. He's not thrown out. Right? He's entitled to be there. And his question needs to be answered. Now, it's a little bit of tough love in terms of how the question is answered. Nonetheless, okay, great. So anything else real quick before we end? All right, so I look forward to seeing you next week. I will send you a reminder and I'll send you a link to the YouTube video. Have a great week, everybody.
You too.
Thank you very
All
much,
right.
Rabbi.
Thank you,
My
Rabbi.
pleasure. Okay,
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
bye.